Super Rugby round number, what are we up to? 8? 3 games on this Saturday, folks. 2 from NZ. Just the 1 from Australia this Saturday because there's 2 Aussie teams on the bye. So it's just the 2 games from Australia this week. Early or kind of late afternoon game, I guess. With the Hurricanes taking on the Crusaders. Evening game with the Chiefs and the Blues. And then across the ditch, the Drua hosting, you could say, the Brumbies. Remember, still no games in Fiji just yet. We'll go through some key events. No, we'll go through some lineups, some stats, predictions, and you guys can let me know your thoughts on how things may play out. The first one, Hurricanes hosting the Crusaders. Hurricanes are 2-3. Could certainly use a win to get the campaign going. The Crusaders were pushed pretty far at home last week by the Landers, which speaks to a decent level of parity in this competition. That being said, I'm sure the Crusaders are still pretty decent favourites for this one away from home, but so far you never really know. The Hurricanes have made a few changes. They've got this guy Kamaka Howden in the back row. He's on for his debut, but he's alongside Kirifi and Savea, so a couple of experienced guys alongside him. They've moved Ruben Love to the bench and put Josh Moorby in at fullback, so that's kind of a straight swap for them. Garden-Bachop still at 10, Perenara still at 9. Jordie Barrett still manning the midfield, so he was alright, pretty solid there last week. I think, defensively he looked pretty solid, which is a key area for when guys from the outside backs tend to move into the midfield. It's one of the harder areas for them to adapt to, but he did alright. The front row of Stones, Rakete-Stones, Aumua and Lomax is still the same. Overall it's a pretty stable lineup with just a kind of little bit of tinkering here and there. I think it's a pretty tidy looking Canes team. Fidow's back on the bench, which is good news. For the Crusaders, they've made a few tinkerings of their own. Matera has come up from the bench to start. Blackadder has switched to the 7 jersey from 6 because Matera takes the 6 jersey. Grace is still there at 8. Braden Enor's in on the midfield, which means Fainga'anuku drops to the bench. So different kind of game. You don't have that kind of big unit of a man, Fainga'anuku, running at you, but Enor is certainly no slouch. Will Jordan's there at fullback. He's a live wire as ever, so look for him to be dangerous. Kind of goes without saying these days. Christie has dropped to the bench to make way for Matera coming up, so it's a little bit of rotation. They've had to bring in Ricky Jackson as the reserve hooker with Klein suspended, so yeah, it's neither side's kind of making wholesale changes. Both sides, I think, look pretty tidy. I'm hoping for a close game. I always do, especially neutral games where it's not involving my Blues. My Blues, I would like to see my Blues blow teams away, but they never really do that. So, could be an interesting one. Stats-wise, the Canes don't love a maul. They only maul on average at 1.8 times a game. The average across all the teams in Super Rugby is 4. So not really a maul team, and there's a reason for that. Their maul success rate is the lowest of all the teams. Their maul is not much of a weapon, which maybe means they're a bit easier to read at line-out time. You know, the chance of them going for a maul is less than some of the other teams. The Crusaders maul at 5.7 times a game, so massively more. So their forward pack is certainly going to have to front up against these Crusaders. For the Crusaders, I mentioned it week in, week out. They play kicks and they play territory more than anybody else. They got the most kick from hands per game in any team in Super Rugby, and they play with a really high amount of territory. They don't like playing in their own half, so kind of stock standard stuff, man. You don't need much explanation on that, but the Crusaders have got the skills to back that up. They do have a maul which can hurt you. They've got guys who can cut you to bits like Jordan, like Havili and whatnot, all these guys. So, Moonga. Yeah, Crusaders are a pretty good team. The Crusaders are favourites. They got the bookies by 7 and the Rugby Forecast algorithm by 4. Both saying the Crusaders are going to go in and get a away win. The second game, my Blues are down in Hamilton trying to do the double over the Chiefs after beating them earlier in the season. The Blues have got a pretty good record, 5-1, just that one last-minute loss to the Hurricanes, which still haunts me. And the Chiefs, bit of a mixed bag, man. Massive win over the Crusaders down in Christchurch, but then pretty well beaten in the reverse fixture in Hamilton. So still trying to get a read on where the Chiefs are at, but personally, I would say the Chiefs certainly at home are favourites for this one. The Chiefs have made, I think, more changes than most of the other teams. Trask's come in at fullback. Narawa has shifted to the right wing. Nankiville's back in the midfield alongside ALB. Gatlin's up because I think Josh Ioane is unavailable. Tupaia drops to the bench. Josh Lord's up from the bench. They've brought in Fidow. Good news is Sowakula's still playing. That's good because remember he missed a couple of games earlier. Bradley Slater and Ollie Norris come in on the bench. So yeah, there's quite a bit going on with the Chiefs lineup. To be fair, it's still a bloody good looking lineup to be honest. But yeah, I mean Sam Cane, Kalen Boshier and Sowakula is a pretty tidy back row. But that being said, the Blues lineup is also not too bad. I should mention there's still Novati. He is unavailable, injured. For the Blues, I mean, Tuamafasi gets a start, which is kind of not surprising. I felt like they were maybe saving him for this game. And sure enough, Romano's back in the starting lineup and Josh Goodhue's back as well. So that's a bit of good news. Tom Robinson, who was initially supposed to play last week but then pulled out last minute, is back in the more familiar back row. Because remember, he was named as a lock, I think, last week. He really didn't play. So Tutu's also back. Bodie Barrett's back. Rico Ioane's back. So a lot of these guys who were kind of on that All Blacks leave are back, which is good news for the Blues, or maybe a little bit disjointed. Perofeta switches to fullback. Talea is also back on one wing. Remember, Caleb Clark ended up appealing his red card decision and has been whacked with a 3-week ban. So, yeah, Ratumaitevuki Neepkins, the youngster, is on the wing instead of him, with Talea on the other. So, yeah, it's a bit of a disappointing one for Caleb Clark. He might have got a shorter ban if he'd not appealed it, but then again, it was one of those weird ones, but still reckless enough that they've banned him. Riccatelli's in on the bench, Rena's on the bench, Tucker's on the bench. Remember, the Blues played a couple of games in quick succession, so they've kind of been rotating through the players, so it seems like a pretty fresh lineup for this one. Stats-wise, I mentioned it before and I mention it again, the Chiefs love the offloads. They play with more offloads than anybody else. They're happy to play with possession. They like having the ball, and they're not afraid to play with the ball in their own half. So, yeah, the Chiefs are a team that can really hurt you from anywhere. The Blues, though, they got the most clean breaks in Super Rugby on average, averaging 6.3 a game. The average across most teams is around 4. But that being said, the Chiefs are just over 5, so the Chiefs aren't far behind. So I reckon in terms of pure entertainment, on paper anyway, Chiefs and Blues looks like it could be an absolute cracker. The predictions-wise, the bookies have got Chiefs by 1. Algorithms got the Chiefs by 3. So not much in it, that one. Predicted to be pretty close. The last one, the Drua and the Brumbies, on paper should be the most lopsided game of the round. But then again, or at least of this day, of the Saturday, we don't play games on paper. We play them on rugby field. So the Drua will be looking to go and play spoilers for this one. They have had one win thus far, but remember it was over the Rebels when the Rebels were looking pretty awful. The Brumbies, though, did suffer their first defeat last week, so they're still right up top, the Brumbies, but yeah, maybe brought back down a little bit with that loss, albeit, I mean, not wholly unexpected. Going away to the Reds has been tough for many teams in Australia in recent times. The Drua have made a few changes, because remember, Nagusa, he's out for 4 weeks with that swinging arm red card, so he's copped the ban. So you got Deralangi in the back row, Midamida's in the back row as well, alongside Tamani, who played last week. And Benimbi has come in the second row. Vota is back in the midfield, which is fantastic news. That man, Habosi, is still on the wing. He has just been absolute lightning. If you're a stats guy, that guy's just been absolutely glorious. But yeah, it's still Lamani and Tella as that 19 combo. They seem to be forming a bit of a good kind of combo at the moment. But yeah, Het's up from the bench as well at loosehead. So a few changes for the Drua guys. And yeah, I don't blame them for doing a wee bit of rotation. Some of it's enforced and some of it is just, I guess, them making sure they keep things fresh. For the Brumbies, I get the feeling they've rotated because they think this one is one where they can afford to. Like, a lot of the bench guys are getting a run. Like Tom Hooper's starting, Ed Kennedy's starting in the back row alongside Reimer, who's into the 23. Valtini moves to 8 from 6. Billy Pollard's getting a game at hooker. So a lot of guys who we haven't seen play last week or played on the bench are now starting. Cam Clark is the same. James Slipper, though, is getting a start, and apparently it's his 150th game, so big congratulations to him. That's a massive achievement. But yeah, guys like Nick Frost, Ryan Lonergan down to the bench. Conor McInerney's back in the side, so yeah, it's It's not what I think you would say is the full strength Brumbies team, but it's by no means a weak team when you got guys like Muirhead, Simone, Ikitau, Tom Wright moving to fullback. So yeah, still pretty tidy. Stats wise, the Drua most defenders beaten, least kicks from hand. They're going to play one way, and that's with ball in hand. And as much as they can get clean breaks, they're just as likely to go through you instead of round you. The Brumbies, man, I talk about that maul. Their maul's a killer. I talk about it week in, week out. I always make sure to give props to their backs as well, who do have some phenomenal numbers, because, you know, I love my stats. Tom Wright especially is having a cracking season, but the maul. If the Drua get the maul wrong, I think they're in big trouble. But if they've been practicing that this week and they can hold the Brumbies out, maybe we'll see a competitive one. The bookies don't think so. The bookies are saying 18 points for the Brumbies. The forecast is a little bit more forgiving. It says Brumbies by 7. But either way, the Drua are big-time underdogs for this one. There you go. 3 games on this weekend. You guys let me know your thoughts. Can you see the Hurricanes holding out at home against the Crusaders? Can the Blues potentially go get an away win in Hamilton? And is there any chance that the Drua manage to upset the Brumbies? You guys let me know your thoughts, folks, and I will talk to you guys again soon. See you later.